In January 2026, the FBI issued a warning unlike almost any it had released before. The target was not a traditional gang. It was not a cartel. It was not a foreign terrorist organization. Instead, investigators were focused on a loosely connected online network known as 764, a group that federal authorities say has exploited children, spread violent extremist ideology, and expanded across international borders through social media, gaming platforms, and encrypted online communities. What began as a small online movement allegedly tied to Texas had grown into something much larger. The FBI would eventually describe it as a national security threat. And behind the headlines was a question that terrified parents and investigators alike. How could an online group that many people had never heard of become one of the most dangerous extremist networks targeting children in America? This is the story of 764, and the investigation that revealed how a hidden online world was operating in plain sight. For years, law enforcement agencies have focused on organized criminal groups that operate through identifiable structures. Traditional gangs have leaders. Cartels have territories. Terrorist organizations often have political objectives. But investigators say 764 was different. According to federal authorities, the network did not operate like a conventional organization. Instead, it functioned as a decentralized online ecosystem. Individuals from different states and different countries connected through private servers, messaging applications, social media accounts, and gaming communities. Many members never met face-to-face. Some reportedly never even learned each other's real names. Yet investigators say they were united by a disturbing ideology that glorified destruction, manipulation, and psychological control. Federal officials have associated the group with what is known as nihilistic violent extremism. Unlike extremist movements driven by religion, politics, or nationalism, nihilistic extremists often promote chaos for its own sake. The objective is not to build something. The objective is simply to destroy. That distinction became one of the most troubling discoveries in the investigation, because it meant there was no clear end goal, no negotiation, no political demand, only an online culture that appeared to celebrate harm, fear, and domination. According to investigators, the network grew by exploiting one of the most vulnerable populations on the internet, children. Federal authorities say members targeted minors through platforms that millions of families use every day. Gaming communities, social media applications, online chat services, video sharing platforms, places where young people gather, socialize, and form friendships. The initial contact often appeared harmless. A message, a conversation, a new online friend. Nothing that would immediately raise suspicion. That was part of what made the alleged operation so effective. The people behind it understood how to build trust, how to identify vulnerable individuals, how to find children who felt isolated, lonely, or disconnected. Investigators say these relationships could continue for weeks or even months before the true intentions became apparent. By then, many victims had already formed emotional attachments to people they had never met. Former investigators have often described this process as digital grooming, not because it happens quickly, but because it happens gradually, one conversation at a time, one message at a time, one layer of trust at a time. And according to federal authorities, that strategy became a central component of the network's growth. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that the online communities connected to 764 extended far beyond a single state. Evidence pointed to members and associates located across the United States and internationally. The network was no longer a local concern. It had become a global one. The scale of the investigation began attracting the attention of multiple federal agencies. Analysts started mapping connections between users. Investigators examined digital communications. Cybercrime specialists worked to identify administrators and key figures operating behind anonymous usernames. The challenge was enormous. Traditional investigations often rely on witnesses, surveillance footage, or physical evidence. This case unfolded largely inside digital spaces. Many conversations were encrypted. Accounts disappeared, usernames changed, servers were deleted. New communities emerged as quickly as old ones vanished. Investigators were chasing a moving target. And every time authorities disrupted one part of the network, another appeared somewhere else. It was like trying to dismantle a structure that continuously rebuilt itself. But law enforcement continued gathering evidence. Over time, patterns began to emerge. Certain individuals appeared repeatedly throughout the investigation. Certain accounts played larger roles than others. and certain communities became central hubs for recruitment and coordination. One of the most significant developments came in April 2025. Federal prosecutors announced charges against individuals alleged to be leaders within the network. According to the Department of Justice, investigators had uncovered evidence suggesting that key figures were operating what authorities described as a global child exploitation enterprise. The arrests represented a major breakthrough. For the first time, law enforcement had moved beyond simply identifying the threat. They were now targeting the people believed to be directing it. But investigators knew the operation was far from over. Networks like this rarely depend on a single leader. Removing one person does not automatically eliminate the ideology. It does not erase the community, and it does not prevent new members from emerging. The challenge was no longer just stopping individuals. It was stopping the system that allowed them to connect. As the investigation expanded, authorities became increasingly concerned about the network's influence on younger users. One reason was the group's apparent ability to normalize harmful behavior through constant exposure. Psychologists have long warned that online communities can reshape perceptions of what is acceptable. When individuals spend enough time in environments where extreme conduct is celebrated, the abnormal can begin to feel normal. The unacceptable can begin to feel acceptable. Investigators believed some communities associated with 764 operated in precisely that way, not through direct commands, but through repetition, through social pressure, through constant reinforcement. This psychological component made the case particularly complex, because unlike physical crimes, online radicalization often occurs gradually and invisibly. Parents may not notice changes immediately. Teachers may not recognize warning signs. Friends may not understand what is happening. Yet the effects can be profound. Federal authorities repeatedly emphasized that prevention would require more than arrests. It would require awareness, education, and active involvement from families. Then came another major development. The FBI announced that it was seeking Austin Yatco. According to federal authorities, Yatco was wanted in connection with allegations involving the 764 network. The case immediately attracted national attention, not only because of the allegations themselves, but because investigators believed his arrest could provide valuable insight into how the network operated. The FBI issued public notices. Photographs circulated online. Tips were requested from the public. A reward was offered for information leading to his capture. The manhunt became a reminder of how seriously federal authorities viewed the threat. This was no longer being treated as a niche cybercrime investigation. It had become a priority. The designation of 764 as a national security concern marked one of the most significant moments in the case. Historically, that label has been reserved for threats capable of causing widespread harm. By applying it to an online extremist network, federal authorities were sending a clear message. The danger was not theoretical. It was real, and it was growing. The question many observers asked was simple. Why had it taken so long to gain public attention? Part of the answer lies in the nature of online crime. Most people are familiar with visible threats. Street crime, robberies, violent attacks. Those crimes leave physical evidence. They create immediate public awareness. Online threats often develop in silence. Victims may never report what happened. Families may not understand what occurred. Investigations can take years before patterns become visible. By the time authorities fully recognize the scope of a network, thousands of interactions may already have occurred. That appears to have been one of the lessons of the 764 investigation. The internet allows communities to form at extraordinary speed. Geographic barriers disappear. An individual in one state can influence someone hundreds or thousands of miles away. The scale is unprecedented, and law enforcement continues adapting to that reality. Another lesson involves vulnerability. Contrary to popular belief, victims are not always people who lack intelligence. Many are simply looking for connection, friendship, acceptance, community. The individuals who exploit them understand that. Investigators repeatedly found evidence suggesting that emotional manipulation often preceded more serious forms of exploitation. The process was rarely sudden. It was calculated, patient, and highly personalized. That is one reason experts continue urging parents to maintain open communication with children about online activity, not through fear, not through constant surveillance, but through trust. Because in many cases, the most effective defense is a child who feels comfortable asking for help. As federal investigations continued, prosecutors worked to build cases against individuals connected to the network. Digital evidence became critical. Messages, account records, electronic devices, server information. Each piece helped investigators reconstruct how communities formed and operated. Cybercrime investigations often resemble giant puzzles. thousands of fragments scattered across different platforms, different jurisdictions, different countries. The challenge is connecting them. The 764 investigation became one of the clearest examples of that complexity. It demonstrated how modern threats rarely fit neatly into traditional categories. Part cybercrime, part exploitation, part extremist movement, part online cult. The boundaries often overlap, and that overlap makes enforcement significantly more difficult. Today, the full impact of the network is still being assessed. New investigations continue. New arrests remain possible, and authorities continue monitoring communities that appear connected to the ideology. What is already clear, however, is that the case has changed how many investigators view online extremism. For years, discussions about national security focused primarily on physical attacks. The 764 investigation revealed another dimension, a threat capable of operating almost entirely through screens, a threat that could reach into homes without crossing a border, a threat that could target children without ever meeting them. That reality has forced law enforcement agencies to rethink what modern extremism looks like. Because in the digital age, danger does not always arrive wearing a mask. Sometimes it arrives as a notification, a friend request, or a message from someone claiming to understand exactly how you feel. The story of 764 is still unfolding. Investigators continue searching for answers. Families continue seeking protection. And federal authorities continue pursuing those they believe helped build and expand the network. But perhaps the most important lesson from this case is that the internet has changed the battlefield. The threats of the future may not emerge from hidden compounds or distant training camps. They may emerge from online communities that appear ordinary on the surface, communities that hide behind usernames and avatars, communities that exploit trust before anyone realizes what is happening. And that is precisely why the FBI says this case matters, not simply because of the individuals involved, but because it revealed how vulnerable people can be manipulated at scale, how technology can amplify harmful ideologies, and how a network that began in relative obscurity could eventually become a national security concern. The investigation continues. The manhunt continues. And for law enforcement, the mission remains the same. Find those responsible, protect potential victims, and prevent the next hidden network from growing in the shadows before anyone notices it exists.